How's it going, guys? I'm Daigo, and today I'm going to be talking about something a tad bit controversial, to say the least. If you've ever seen Naruto, there's a very high chance that your least favorite character in the show is Danzo. I'll make the case that Danzo is actually a good character that has a very gray morality, which is not very common in shonen anime. I'm not saying his actions are good and that he's a good person, but I'm just saying he's a layered character that deserves a more complex analysis. And if you look deeper into it, you can actually understand where he's coming from with his actions. First, let's take a look at Danzo's philosophy. He believes that a true ninja is the one that acts from the shadows. Someone that's willing to self-sacrifice in order to protect the peace and the village. Danzo definitely believes that the ends justify the means, and that's exactly what he does throughout the entire anime. In his search for peace and prosperity, he's willing to do absurd things, violent things that most people think they're despisable, and they're right, but they have to understand that Danzo's philosophy isn't like Naruto's philosophy. Danzo is a much colder character that doesn't really care about the way his objectives are accomplished. And to illustrate that, let's take a look at Danzo's actions throughout the manga and how he goes about maintaining the peace and trying to keep the village safe. One of Danzo's main priorities was to keep the Kyuubi away from the Akatsuki, and he did that by trying to sway Tsunade not to send Naruto into missions outside of the village because he would just become a target, and he knew the Akatsuki was after him. So sending him after Gaara, for example, was something Tsunade didn't really have to do because Naruto was not a particularly powerful ninja at that time. He was just a genin, and he wouldn't make much difference in many missions. He was actually more of a liability because the Kyuubi could come out of him and just cause a lot of trouble, just like he did against Deidara and against Orochimaru. So Danzo had a point in that, but still, people get mad at him because Naruto is the main character and we want to see him go into missions and winning battles, and Danzo just wanted to avoid that in order to protect the village and keep the Kyuubi safe. Also, when Pain attacked the Leaf Village, Danzo killed the messenger frog that was gonna call back Naruto. And he had some reasons for that. Of course, killing the frog was terrible, but still, Naruto was still a genin at that time, and Danzo had no reason to believe that he was gonna be powerful enough to defeat Pain. Surely he did a good job against Kakuzu, but Pain was in another league, and Danzo did not know Naruto was training Sage Mode. And even so, if you consider that Danzo could know that Naruto was training Sage Mode, Sage Mode Naruto actually lost the fight to Pain. If you rewatch the fight, you're gonna see that Pain beats Sage Mode Naruto, and the Kyuubi has to come in and save him. So Danzo had a point. The Kyuubi was almost taken. It was very, very close. So he was actually very rational when trying to keep the Kyuubi away and trying to keep Naruto in the village. It may seem like an asshole, but at the end, the Kyuubi could have been taken, and Danzo was trying to avoid that at all costs. Sasuke and Orochimaru were two of the most prominent rogue ninja from Konoha. Even though Danzo had worked with Orochimaru in the past in order to gain the power of Hashirama to control his Izanagi, Orochimaru had become too dangerous and he had to be dealt with in order to keep the village safe. Similarly, even though Sasuke had left the village very young, Danzo had seen the true potential of the Uchiha clan with Shisui and Itachi and knew that Sasuke could become a very, very big problem in the future. He was not wrong, seeing that when Sasuke found out the whole truth about the Uchiha massacre, he was very pissed at Danzo and wanted revenge. The whole village, which meant Sasuke had become a problem. And a problem that would eventually kill him, but that's... we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. Essentially, Danzo sent Sai as a spy in order to assassinate Sasuke and try to gather some information on Orochimaru because he didn't think Sai would be able to kill Orochimaru, and some people may claim that he leaked some information from the village in order to get closer to Orochimaru. I believe that was only a smokescreen in order to gain his trust, and I don't think any sensitive information would be delivered to Orochimaru because Danzo was actually trying to work for the village, even though we didn't like that because we didn't want Sasuke to die. And yes, having worked with Orochimaru is a very shady thing, and probably one of the worst things Danzo had done. Even though he did a lot of bad things, but that's just one more for the list. Everything for that power and those Hashirama cells, am I right? Yeah, well, let's now talk about the worst thing Dun's ever done. Now, just like the fall of Rome and World War II, the Uchiha Clan massacre had many different causes, but Danzo was definitely a catalyst. Would the massacre have happened without Danzo? Probably, but probably not the same way that happened in the anime. There's a high chance that if Danzo wasn't around, the Uchiha coup would have actually happened and a civil war would entail the village. However, if Danzo wasn't around, Shisui could have used his eye in order to convince Fugaku not to do anything, which was his plan in the beginning, but Danzo obviously didn't allow that to happen because he kind of stole his eye, which was also really bad. The third Hokage also tried to negotiate with the Uchiha in order to reach a better result, but at the end, Danzo didn't really want to negotiate that much. He wanted the Uchiha to be dealt with, he knew their power, and the worst thing he did was obviously coerce Itachi to use him as a pawn and scarred him emotionally and psychologically for the rest of his life. The same thing can be said about Sasuke, which watched all his family being dealt with, which was bad enough. But having said all that, the coup was avoided, and a civil war would have been much worse than just the Uchiha Clan massacre, and that's the justification. Itachi agreed to it, so he knew it was his only option, and Danzo was a catalyst, but ultimately he wasn't the sole reason for the Uchiha massacre. If Danzo wasn't around, there were two possible outcomes. Either the coup would have happened and the civil war would have destroyed the village and make the village very vulnerable to foreign nations, or Shisui would have succeeded and used Kodo Amatsukami on Fugaku, which would have avoided all that. But we don't actually know if that would have worked. Kodo Amatsukami works in a very weird way. For example, in the 5 Kage Summit, Mifune was awakened just by knowing he was inside the Genjutsu. So probably one of his eyes, which was in the crow, worked differently from the other eye, which meant it was the more powerful eye. So the eye Danzo actually got was probably weaker than the other eye in the crow. We can assume that Shisui would have used the powerful eye. Danzo actually admired Itachi very much. He thought Itachi was the perfect shinobi. He did not care about glory. He did the job in the most cold way possible and in the best way possible. He did a pretty good job getting rid of his family, and Itachi's philosophy actually kind of aligns itself with Danzo's philosophy. He changed his mind after he came back and seeing the problem he's created with Sasuke, but still, at that time, even though Itachi went through a lot of pain, he did it willingly. He could have aligned himself with Uchiha clan, but he chose Danzo's side because he knew it was going to be a less violent solution, even though it was going to completely destroy his mental health. I can only imagine. And one of the worst things right after the massacre was that Danzo just stole 1,000 Sharingan from the Uchiha and implanted them on his arm. That's a really shady thing to do. One could argue that he just went with the massacre plan because he wanted the Sharingan to be transplanted into his arm and he wanted that power, which is a really bad thing. But on the other hand, one can think that, oh well, they're dead, they're not gonna use their eyes anymore, I might as well implant it in my arm and get some powers. Of course, that if people in the village knew he had Sharingan in his arm, no one would approve of that, because that's a really shady Orochimaru-esque thing to do. But at the end, the massacre served to preserve peace, at least for the time being. But this massacre would come back to bite his ass at the end, because he created a little monster called Sasuke Uchiha. In Danzo's last moments, we found out what he was really like and where his intentions lied, and we actually realized he wasn't that bad of a guy. So essentially, he went to the 5 Kage Summit and failed miserably to become the leader of the Allied Shinobi forces because Ao ruined that plan, finding out he was using Kodo Matsukami. Still, he didn't lash out. He was like, okay, you guys found out, now I guess I have to be here and do something else. And he planned to run away as soon as he could, so when Sasuke showed up, he just booked it. But Obito caught up with him and ordered Sasuke to fight him. So what happened then? Well, we know what happened. Sasuke outsmarted Danzo, and Danzo actually lost the fight. Some people say, no, he killed himself, it doesn't count. But yeah, Sasuke actually won the fight because Danzo died after a direct confrontation against Sasuke, which means, of course, Sasuke won the battle. But still, Danzo had a plan and he wanted to take out both Sasuke and Tobi because in his mind they were very, very realistic dangers to the Leaf Village and very dangerous shinobi that could invade a 5 Kage summit and wreak havoc in there, so they had to be dealt with. Danzo actually wanted to use Shisui's eye to take care of Tobi and beat Sasuke fair and square, but when he realized he couldn't actually beat Sasuke without Shisui's eye, it was too late, and, well, we know what happened. So when Danzo's about to go, we get a flashback with him and the third Hokage, the future third Hokage. We see that Danzo was not very brave, and he had a tenacious rivalry with Hiruzen. Hiruzen actually, well, got the better of him because he volunteered himself to the sacrifice play before Danzo could. Danzo actually admitted he felt very relieved when Hiruzen did it, but still, you can see that Danzo had a bit of a inferiority complex, and he wanted to be better than Hiruzen. More so, I would say, than the rivalry between Naruto and Sasuke. It was a more intense and not as friendly rivalry, but you can see that Danzo still respected Hiruzen a lot. His final play was to attempt a sealing jutsu on Tobi and Sasuke, which failed, but if he would have been quicker, he would have taken down both Sasuke and Tobi, which would be, you know, it would avoid the war entirely. And it is very poetic that as he's about to die, he remembers Hiruzen, and his last thoughts are, well, now it's my turn to protect the village. And then we see him running to catch up with Hiruzen when they were kids. And that's actually a very nice moment. He actually died with the intent to protect the village at all costs. And I think that at the end, he was following on the third Hokage's steps and trying to use the Will of Fire to protect the village and everybody in it. So Danzo made many mistakes and terrible things during his life, but everything, at least when we see him in Shippuden, was done in order to protect the village and to ensure security and prosperity. When I think about Danzo, he reminds me of characters like Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. And if you think about it, if Danzo was not in Naruto, if he was in a signing anime, or even in Game of Thrones, he would have been a much more likable character, because in those types of shows, characters are not extremely good all the time. They all have flaws, and they all struggle in order to maintain their moral compass intact. You know, Tywin Lannister is very badass.
I am the king!
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
And people really like him, but people hate Danzo, and they are essentially the same type of character. They do terrible things, but they have a somewhat noble goal in mind. In the case of Tywin, it's somewhat noble, but in the case of Danzo, it's very noble. He wants to protect the village. And I think that's the beauty of the character. He is a great character, and I stand by it. He's not a perfect person, far from it, but I think people should appreciate more what Kishimoto was going for when writing this character. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with me? Do you think Danzo is a good character? Do you hate his guts? Comment down below, and also comment any ideas for future videos. If you've come this far, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.